You're listening to Superflexology, a Superflex-focused fantasy football podcast with your hosts John Bauer and Mitch Sorensen.
All right, welcome to episode 15 of Superflexology. I'm your host, John Bauer. You can find me on Twitter at The Bauer Club. Unfortunately, Mitch is not able to join tonight, but he will be back next week. And don't worry, you're not going to be forced to listen to me ramble for the next hour by myself. I have a great guest joining us tonight. But before we get there, I am thrilled to announce that we are now a proud member of the Full-Time Fantasy Network. You're still going to be able to listen to us on whichever platform you typically use, but going forward, you're going to be able to listen to us on fulltimefantasy.com. A ton of great content over there. If you haven't had a chance, go check it out. All right, I don't want to waste another second before introducing our guest for tonight. From Yahoo Fantasy, she can be found on Twitter and Instagram at Liz Loza _FF. Welcome to the show, Liz. How's it going?
I am great. How are you? Thank you so much for having me. And I'm bummed that the third wheel won't be along for this ride, this joy ride.
Yeah, so we typically, and it's kind of weird for me because I'm looking out my window here. So I record in my soon-to-be baby's nursery.
Congratulations.
And thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, August 17th is the due date, so 1 month out.
Oh, that's the day after my husband's birthday.
Oh, very good.
A Leo.
So the baby is in good company there as a Leo.
Yes, indeed.
So I'm looking out the window here. It's very strange because we typically record around 9:30 at night here on the Eastern Standard Time, and it's still bright out, so I'm just kind of adjusting to it. But yeah, Mitch, he's out in Utah, so you know the change here that we're recording, it kind of bummed him out a little bit. But hopefully you can join us again in the future, and he can join us then.
I mean, we'll see how this goes. I don't want to make any promises just yet, but yes, most likely.
No. I would never make you commit this early. So before we get into fantasy football discussions, I would be very upset with myself, Liz, if I didn't ask you a question. And it's not the typical, how did you get into fantasy football, blah, blah, blah. So before you got into fantasy football, you were an actress, correct? Mm-hmm. And I had heard the story when you were on another podcast that you had auditioned for the movie The Room.
Yes.
So I have to ask, cult classic, did you get to meet Tommy Wiseau?
Oh, yes.
How was that experience? Because, so anybody that's listening, The Room, again, cult classic, 2003, I think it grossed like close to nothing. And then it really became widespread whenever the movie with James Franco, The Disaster Artist, came out. But you see interviews with Tommy Wiseau, and he's a really interesting character. So how was that experience?
So I will say that I had not even graduated college yet. I was going to college studying theater and acting, as well as linguistics and anthropology, because my mom refused to allow me to go to college and major in acting. And that was it. She was like, I'm not paying for college for a theater degree. So you're going to double major. Like, you can major in theater, but also something else. And so my other degree was in linguistics, equally marketable, obviously. So I was interning in Los Angeles as I was not even old enough to drink, interning here for a casting director, trying to get a feel for the business, and also at the same time auditioning for anything that would have me. I didn't understand how any of it worked. Totally green, not really that many people to guide me. I wasn't a member of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, at the time. And so I answered a notice, I'd send my headshot in or answer an email. I'd see what the casting reports were, and submitted myself for this thing called The Room and got an audition. So I went to the audition, and it was wild. It was in the heart of Hollywood, which at the time, which is still not a great neighborhood, but we've all sort of we know what it is. But at the time, it was even a less great neighborhood. And again, I didn't even live in LA. So I got to this audition, and it was in my memory, it feels like an auditorium. It might have been a giant black box theater, but in my memory, it was this giant auditorium of similarly clueless young actors milling around, holding sides, not really, sides are your lines, your papers, not really knowing what to do. And there was this madman who was of clear Eastern European descent with this wild black curly hair, dressed in all black, like sweating profusely, but not really understanding why he's sweating so hard, and like wound up in like basically just like a Tasmanian devil, like coming up to the women and saying like, I need passion. Okay, you got these sides, you're going to go. Okay, you. And there was a giant sofa in the middle of this large room that felt like an auditorium. And he just started like pointing to us and like pairing us up and throwing us onto this sofa and saying like, okay, this scene is about passion. This man, he wants to fuck. This guy can use the F word. My goodness. Like, I'm not a prude, but yikes, this is Hollywood. This is the business. Ugh. And so he would pair us up and then like have us basically make out with the partner that we had. Like, it was just like, I made out with this boy for I don't know how long. It was great. And then like he would be like, decide yes or no, and then like pair you up with some other pairing. And the role that I was auditioning for was Lisa.
I was going to ask you, was it Lisa?
Yep. And then this lasted, like, it was basically like, I'd say a couple of lines. The writing clearly wasn't that great. I'd make out with someone, and then we'd be told to stay or go. And the poor guy that I auditioned with, like the first guy I made out with, like double parked and was afraid to leave because Tommy had no like rhyme or reason or schedule to this audition. And so his car got towed. And I felt so bad for him because he was just like, do I put money in the meter? I'm afraid. What if he calls my number? And like, you have to understand, like, we had no idea. We were like completely green. It's not a union film. Like, it's a mess. And then I did my audition. He finally let me go. I did not get my car towed, thankfully. And then I got a call back for the role of Lisa. Like, he narrowed it down to me and like 4 other girls or something, and I politely declined the callback because my gut said this is probably not a good idea.
Yeah, I think you were probably in the right there. And it's funny because you said he was clearly of Eastern European descent, and at least in the
or maybe he's not. In my mind, that's what it was. Like, maybe I made an assumption. I don't know.
Well, no, it's funny. In the movie The Disaster Artist, he says that he's from New Orleans, and everybody's like, well, that's not a New Orleans accent.
So wait, I remember, just like fast forward, I remember then like later, like after moving out to Los Angeles, not in 2003, like much later after having graduated college and moving out to Los Angeles, randomly seeing billboards that were like kind of falling apart promoting this film. And I was like, are you with Tommy Wiseau's face and The Room, and that's it, like this epic picture. And I was like, is that the fit? That was my first audition in Los Angeles when I was like 18 or 19. Like, oh my God, like it was just completely tilting.
And again, I looked it up, and I think it grossed like 1,500 in theaters. Like, that was it. So what? 100 people, maybe? I don't know, whatever. So, I want to transition. We talked about The Room a little bit. Now I want to talk about a few backfields where there might not be enough room in 2019. Do you like that segue there?
Oh, I thought you were going to go running back rooms, but your show, do you?
Yeah. So we typically spend a lot of time discussing dynasty values on the show, but the truth of the matter is short-term outcomes, whether we like to admit it or not, they impact dynasty values tremendously. So I want to look at a few backfields tonight. And Liz, let me know how you think they shake out just in 2019. So the first backfield, and I don't want to get yelled at by Mitch, because if I don't ask you about this backfield, he's going to let me hear it. The Kansas City Chiefs. So it's probably one of the most polarizing backfields in all of fantasy football during the offseason. Nobody really rides the fence on this. You either love Damian Williams and you think he's going to be a big-time impact player in 2019, or you think he's going to be replaced. So how do you see this situation playing out?
Well, I don't have to love Damian Williams' talent to love his situation. And if we are focusing on short-term gains, then there's no way you can't appreciate him. I mean, it's interesting, right? Because when he was in Miami for 4 years, he averaged a career high of 3.9 yards per carry and was often dinged for being, for tiptoeing, right? Like, that was the knock against him. And yet, when he came to Kansas City, he beat out Charkandrick West as the change of pace option. And then, lo and behold, Kareem Hunt makes a big gaffe, and Spencer Ware is struggling and injured, and Williams' snap percentage just skyrocketed. He was on the field for 12% of the team's plays in week 1, And then he went from that to touching the ball 16 times for a total of 123 yards and 2 scores in week 15, right? So I understand why people are like, what are we going to get here? But I look at that offense, and I look at the 6 touchdowns over the last 4 games of the season that he produced, 4 touchdowns in just 2 playoff games. And the fact, and this is the situation, right? Like, you have Pat Mahomes and you have this incredible ascending offense, which means that he is not seeing a stacked front. So he can tiptoe like a prima ballerina all he wants and still find giant holes. I also think he's looked a lot better than he did in Miami. Now, people can mature, coaching can certainly help here. So the fact that he saw a stacked front just 14% of the time and a light front 58% of the time, and was able to manage 5 yards per carry when facing that light front as he should, that is awesome. You throw in the fact that he can catch, has a catch rate of nearly 85%, and I think he is good enough to be great in this incredible offense.
I'm actually really happy that you brought up the point that he's not facing a lot of stacked boxes, which he shouldn't with Patrick Mahomes, being able to throw the ball and move the ball down the field. But one knock that I see over and over again, especially on Twitter, because especially this time of year, there's really not a lot of new information, so people just want to argue and debate. Yeah. Exactly. So one of the big things that people knock him for is certain metrics, and one of them is like his elusiveness rating. So Pro Football Focus, fantastic information they have there, but one of the things that he doesn't really score well in is elusiveness rating and yards after contact per attempt. But like you said, that's not really what he's being asked to do. If those holes are there, he's going to be able to produce. And you hit the nail on the head, Liz. If you are put in a special situation, which he is, I'm pretty sure I might be able to produce that offense. And I can tell you, I'm not in very good shape.
I'm sure you're in fine shape, but the point also is, if you're going to talk about yak metrics and elusiveness and juke rate and all of that stuff, there's a player on the team who fills that role. He happens to be a wide receiver. His name is Tyreek Hill, and he is going to see the field this year. So I think you are absolutely correct in saying that, like, that's not Damian Williams' role. And when you look at the history of what Andy Reid has done with a single running backfield, you can't help, I think, be high on Damian Williams. Is he in that first tier of guys? No, but if you're looking at the second round and maybe you want to go running back and try to pick up AJ Green in the third round as a value play, this would obviously be in redraft, not dynasty, and load up on running backs in your first 2 rounds, I don't think, crap happens, right? Like, there is a chance that he does get replaced down the stretch, but by who? It's going to take an injury. I mean, we saw Carlos Hyde, and certainly Carlos Hyde, when brought back to Cleveland's offense, at least momentarily at the beginning of last year, brought all that giddy up back, right? Like, we saw that, but it didn't last. Like, that's not... I'm not worried about Carlos Hyde stealing all of Damian Williams' thunder. There could be some new running back unearthed. That's possible, just like Damian Williams did Spencer Ware dirty. But this is all so theoretical and also won't happen in your first 4 to 6 weeks likely. And that, if you're in win now, which it sounds like you're focusing on, this is a head-to-head proposition, and you worry about that stuff and maneuver and adjust as the season unfolds. So I think he's going to see upwards of, I would say 17 touches per game is pretty likely.
I'm right on board with you. And it's so the 3 teams that we're going to discuss in a little bit, there are situations where we might see more of a committee. But in Kansas City, Andy Reid, he doesn't build his offenses that way. So if you look back to 2003, he has only had that's actually the last time that he had a running back 2 that was in the top 36. So he is, I don't want to say he's focused on the workhorse, but for lack of a better term, that's what he does. He focuses on one running back.
Well, I was going to say also, who's his OC? Bieniemy, right? What position did he play?
Running back, exactly. And Bieniemy came out, a month ago, and he said that Damian Williams is our starter. And then we got the vote of confidence within the last week, Andy Reid said Damian Williams is our starter, so he's going to get the opportunity. And I know it's really dangerous to look at coach speak this time of year because everybody wants to hype up their players. But you now have had two situations from separate people saying that Damian Williams is going to be their starter. So I have one question for you before we move on. And this is the Twitter darling. What do you think of Darwin Thompson? Do you think he has any chance in hell of replacing Damian Williams throughout the season?
I think there is always a chance because of the offense that is being run. If the Chiefs continue to do what they are doing, as we have seen with Damian Williams, another back could be elevated to superstar status, but it's not going to happen unless Williams is hurt, right? Also, Brett Veach said back in February that this job was Williams to lose. So while I appreciate that you're bringing up a point about coach speak not being worth listening to this time of year, it's also something that we have now heard consistently from the franchise. So I think we're allowed to believe it. And yes, I do think that there's opportunity for other running backs, but it's only going to happen if an injury occurs to Williams, which could happen on any dang team.
I absolutely agree, and I can speak for Mitch on this matter. He would agree with you 100%. So in your mind, Damian Williams is his backfield to lose, whether it's an injury or let's say he just falls flat on his face. Right now, according to FFWC ADP and FFWC Fantastic Leagues, check it out, playffwc.com. They have redraft, dynasty, best ball, buy-ins ranging from $35 up to $299. But so looking at that ADP, Liz, he's currently going running back 13. Would you be willing to pull the trigger and take him right around there? Running
back 13, I think, excuse me, I mean, I have him ranked running back 11, so yes.
Perfect. Mitch will be very happy whenever he listens back to this that you are on board the Damian Williams hype train here, and you're not buying into Carlos Hyde, Darwin Thompson, the other options that might be available. So moving forward here, and it's funny because you and I, we spoke about this before we started recording. Yahoo Fantasy, you guys released an article about the Seattle Seahawks. So one of the backfields that, again, it's the rage on Twitter because you have about 50% of the people screaming from the mountaintops, Chris Carson, and then you have people screaming Rashad Penny. How do you see this backfield playing out in 2019?
Well, I think that Chris Carson is going to be the starter to begin the season, which is why he has higher draft cost than Rashad Penny. And I also, last year, I liked Rashad Penny a lot, and so did the Seahawks, otherwise they wouldn't have traded up into the first round to grab him. I don't think that they thought Chris Carson was going to stay healthy, which is exactly why I'm worried about him this year. Yes, he stayed healthy for the most part last year, but this is a kid who's had massive injuries since high school, right? He tore his ACL his senior year of high school, which prevented him from going to Georgia. Then he sprained his ankle in 2015. He had a thumb injury in 2016. He broke his ankle, as we all remember, his rookie season with the Seahawks in 2017. He just had his knee scoped this past May. OMG. Of course, the Seahawks, now it makes sense, traded up to get a dynamic, now slimmed down running back as insurance, because I don't think they thought that Chris Carson was going to stay healthy last year, and all of the Rashad Penny truthers who were so upset that he wasn't getting his opportunity. I just thought about, you guys look at this franchise. They have an opportunity to keep this 7th round pick, very cheap draft capital running back who is a bruiser, who is a beast, who is very difficult to take down. Even though he's not so big, he had a juke rate of nearly 35%, which is RB6 last year, and 58 broken tackles. He is still standing. Why in the world would you risk the health of your younger first round pick that you gave up picks to get when the other guy is doing the job and staying on the field? Now, the question remains, can he continue to stay on the field? I am going to lean into value and say, look at the past. I don't think so. Give me the fresher, younger legs that the team is clearly higher on, thus the first round pick.
So let me ask you a question here. Mike Davis, he went to Chicago, and how do you feel about that? Because you're a Bears fan, correct?
I feel I feel like poor Mike Davis is being out-hyped by David Montgomery, who might be the most hyped player of this offseason, who I've met David, by the way, and he is going to work very hard, and he is a great kid, and we had a nice long conversation, but like, y'all need to pump the brakes on all of it.
Well, I'm lucky that I avoided him in the Scott Fish Bowl this year. So we look at Mike Davis, and with him leaving, he had 112 carries last year, 42 targets. So my question is, do you think there is any way that the Seahawks go full-blown committee between Carson and Penny, and we see close to a 50-50 split, and both can outperform their current redraft
Absolutely.
ADPs?
Well, I don't know if both can... I don't know if Chris Carson can outperform his current redraft ADP. He might be at peak value right now, but I do think the chance, and that's assuming a full-blown committee, I do think a full-blown committee is likely. I also think there's a very strong possibility that this turns into a hot hand approach, and whichever running back is out there doing the job as the team is ascending is the one who's going to stay on the field. Schottenheimer wants to run relentlessly. He has been unabashedly honest about that. I think both of these guys can get the job done. And, I mean, when you look at Penny's 3.4 yards after contact per attempt, his breakaway run rate, I can never say that, breakaway run rate,
that's a tongue twister.
At RB6 and a true yards per carry at 4.6. Like this guy did some stuff. He just underwhelmed because we all thought that last year was going to be his year. I also feel like nobody's talking about this point that, you know, Penny is an excellent pass catcher. Carson can get the job done, but Penny is an excellent pass catcher. And with Doug Baldwin no longer on the team, even if Chris Carson is in that backfield, it wouldn't surprise me to see Penny additionally lining up in the slot and working as a change of pace guy until, and sort of, right now I guess I see it as not, it could be a 50-50 split. I think we might get to that point. I think Penny might eventually take over the job when Carson gets hurt and benched, and then I think the job will become Penny's. But I think to start the season, you're going to see Carson, it's going to be a 2 to 1/3 breakdown to begin with.
Like you said, again, you hit the nail on the head. Schottenheimer, he's made a commitment to the run. I think it was, 52% of the plays they ran on last year, which had to be one of the highest in the NFL. So one name that I want to drop on you, because, and you kind of mentioned it with Penny, that he can catch the ball. But we didn't really see that last year. We didn't see much of an opportunity.
He had averaged less than one target per game.
Yeah, actually, between Carson and Penny, they saw 36 total targets. So the question I have for you, and this is a guy that's not even being drafted in redraft right now. I'm getting my shovel out. I'm digging deep. Do you think J.D. McKissic can make any impact from a pass-catching standpoint?
Do I think he'll see the field? Yes. Enough to make a fantasy impact? No, not when you have these two other capable backs. And you've got Tyler Lockett still, Tyler Lockett's job is going to be interesting next year because we don't really know what these outside receivers could do, but we know that Seattle is obviously drafting some big bodies, and I would imagine they're doing that so as to eschew the likelihood of Lockett getting hurt again, even though he stayed healthy last year and finally broke out, right? So I feel like if you put J.D. McKissic on the field, your offense is becoming all the more predictable, and you're already in a predictable offense.
I completely agree with that. J.D. McKissic's not going to be in there to be a bruiser. He's not going to be running between the tackles. Like you said, they are going to be predictable if he's in the offense. So for me personally, and I actually, like I mentioned, the Scott Fish Bowl, and I know you're in that as well. How did your draft go?
It's still going, friend.
It's still going on.
And I'm probably guilty too. I'm probably part of the reason it's still going. I think my average draft time is higher than the rest of the folks, so I shouldn't complain too much. But it's still going.
You're a busy person. I think people are going to understand with that. That's okay. But for me, so I actually stacked Chris Carson and Rashad Penny, and here was my mindset. So I got them fairly late. I guess that's kind of relative, depending on the league or the division. But for Chris Carson, I got him right around running back 26, and Rashad Penny, I took him around running back 30, and coincidentally, that's right around their current ADP. So here was my mindset. I actually think that both can be productive given the opportunity. And like you, I think it could get into that 50-50 split. even if Rashad Penny takes over the reins towards the end of the season, I secured that backfield. And then, God forbid, let's say Chris Carson gets injured, I solidified myself a running back one by taking Rashad Penny. So that was the way I looked at it. So I got both of them. I felt like it was solid value, and I kind of stacked them. Now, the issue is going to be that if they do the hot hand approach, like you mentioned, which I hope they don't, I'm going to start Chris Carson. Penny's going to get the ball. I'm going to start Penny. Carson's going to get the ball. I know my fantasy luck, and that's how it's going to go.
Absolutely. And for what it's worth, I also did draft Rashad Penny in the Scott Fishbowl as well. So, and I have Tyler Lockett in the Fishbowl too. So I took Penny in the 9th round.
I think that's right around where I got him. I know it was either the 8th or 9th. I might have reached a little bit, but again, I wanted to stack that backfield as the draft progressed. That was one thing that I saw that I
actually, I'm sorry, I took him in the 11th spot of the 8th round, so the end of the 8th round, almost the 9th round. So yeah, so we're in lockstep on that. It sounds like.
Then I think I'm in good company. I like my decision. If Liz Loza supports it, I'm good with it. So. Great insight on Seattle. The next backfield, and this is one where we actually just got a piece of news today. I think it came from the Sleeper app that Phillip Lindsay is a full go. So, Liz, let's dive into the Denver backfield. Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, draft capital versus undrafted free agent. How do you see this one shaking out?
Well, I think that Phillip Lindsay is being drafted a bit too high. And I am, again, almost always I'm going to lean into value unless it is a superstar guy. When there are so many, when you're not in that first tier of players and there are question marks, almost always I'm going to lean into the value. So here's basically my take. When you look at the Denver Broncos, you have to imagine that with Joe Flacco under center, this team is going to strive for balance, right? They don't want to leave it up to Joe Flacco to win football games despite his eliteness. So that to me means a healthy dose of rushing plays. But Lindsay's not, like, we've got the wrist injury, and yes, he's going to be a full go. But since he hasn't been, Royce Freeman has been able to earn extra reps. He's improved his receiving chops. And so I think we're looking at a platoon. So I think
you were putting the emphasis.
That's right.
On the
they were going to look at a platoon. I don't know why that messed me up. Anyway, and so people want to knock Freeman, right? But like, bro was hurt, had a high ankle sprain. Like, that is it for a running back. He had a high ankle sprain for so much of last year. And I look at him this year. There's a new offensive coordinator who comes from the Kyle Shanahan scheme. We know what that looks like, right? It's Rich Scangarello. It's a zone scheme. You've got Freeman, who's this one-cut runner. He should excel on early downs and certainly in short yardage situations. And I am not undoing anything that Lindsay accomplished last year. His story was incredible. The first rookie in NFL history to be invited, who was undrafted, to be invited to the Pro Bowl. All the props. Statistically, like, we know he's electric in space. He had 11 breakaway runs. But he's also undersized. And why in the world would you not try to learn from your mistakes? I mean, I know it's Denver, but like, you look at him and you're like, well, this guy's coming off of an injury. He was slow to heal from it. He's undersized. Freeman is a perfect fit for these short yardage situations. It just seems like there's no reason to feed Lindsay and risk his body breaking down when you have another not just capable, but like successful back who also you spent more money on.
It's funny, you can't bring up this backfield in this situation without bringing up Rich Scangarello. And on a previous episode, Mitch and I dove into a few teams with coaching changes or offensive coordinator changes. And of course, this is one of the situations that came up. So, you touched on Royce Freeman and being the first and second down back. And I 1,000% agree. I think he's going to have more of an impact this year. And like you said, I don't think they're going to be able to feed Lindsay the way that some people, especially people that are investing in him right now in, somewhat early rounds. We're looking at the 5th round in ADP. I don't know if they're really going to get the return. And, I have a question for you. So you have a new coach, you have a new offensive coordinator. Does draft capital come into play at all? So you have the 3rd round pick in Royce Freeman, you have the undrafted free agent Philip Lindsay. Is that in the back of their mind at all, or do they say, screw it, we're a new staff, we're going to play, the guy that we think should be playing?
Well, I think it all trickles down from the front office, right? And we know that the front office is not particularly quiet in Denver. So, so I think that is all enmeshed, particularly at this franchise. But I also think that when you look at what Lindsay did was so exceptional, yes, because of the story of it, the local kid, the undraftedness, but also his big plays were highlight reel worthy. You remember them. They stick in your mind, right? You're like, oh, but then when you look at the secondary stats and you compare them to what Royce Freeman did, so Philip Lindsay saw only saw a stacked front 14% of the time, I think, 13.8, some 14 point something, 14% of the time. And yet he ranked outside of the top 50 yards after contact per attempt, outside of the top 50 running backs in that metric. And his missed tackle percentage was under 10%, whereas Freeman was much more efficient in both of those categories. He didn't have the big plays. He's not on the highlight reel, so we don't remember it. But I also feel like efficiency is going to matter much more when you look at the composition of the other players within this offense. And when you look at the defense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely going to play an impact. So one thing that I want to look at, and typically Mitch and I, we kind of do a little quick rapid fire in terms of ADP. So you look at Philip Lindsay, he's going right around running back 25. A running back that's going right behind him, coincidentally, it's one of your Chicago Bears, Tariq Cohen. So given the chance and the opportunity and the decision to make, do you take a Philip Lindsay or Tariq Cohen? Again, looking strictly at 2019.
I would take Philip Lindsay ahead of Tariq Cohen. Too many mouths to feed in Chicago. It's just complicated.
And so looking at one of the wide receivers going right around that range, and again, I did not do this on purpose. It's just how they laid out. Allen Robinson is going right behind Philip Lindsay. So do you take the running back in that situation and go Lindsay, or do you look at Allen Robinson, or even a Jarvis Landry, we'll say?
Can I opt for neither? I would say that I don't like either of those picks right there, but how about Mark Ingram? Can I get him? Can I hope he falls one spot? I would take Mark Ingram, who's going one spot ahead of Philip Lindsay, over either of those options.
I love Mark Ingram. And one of the backfields I wanted to bring up tonight, but we had a few others that we wanted to discuss, was the Baltimore Ravens. And I love Mark Ingram. So I would be okay with that. I'm going to allow that. Yeah, absolutely. So Royce Freeman, he's going running back 36. And one of the running backs going right behind him is Miles Sanders. In redraft 2019, are you taking Freeman or Miles Sanders? Who's, again, he's in another backfield that's kind of crowded.
I'm going to take Royce Freeman. Too many questions around Miles Sanders. I know there was a report that said that Wendell Smallwood and Josh Adams may not even make the team, but it's July. Those reports, they got to say something. So I'm still going to, I think I'll still end up going with Royce Freeman. I'm going to go against my ranks in that one.
Okay, so if I'm reading this correctly, and you kind of mentioned it earlier, you're looking more at the value in the situation. You're okay taking Royce Freeman at his current value as opposed to Philip Lindsay.
Yeah.
All right, one more backfield we want to hit on, and this might be one of the most crowded of them all. The San Francisco 49ers.
Yeah, I saw this on the list, and I was like, okay. So I got... Here, I think the reason this is so frustrating is because you've got the Tevin Coleman truthers and the Jerick McKinnon hype wagon drivers, right? And then you have to realize that Kyle Shanahan is president of both of those fan clubs. So that makes things much more complicated because neither Coleman, or I should say rather both Coleman and McKinnon, have proven to us that they are not RB1s, that they are not able to be workhorses, that they need to be working within a platoon. Not a platoon, but a platoon. And so then you look at Matt Breida, right? And I think, is he not one of the most underrated running backs here? And I know there's a report that said that like one of these guys is going to be a healthy scratch. And so is it the guy who's working back from an ACL tear, but the guy that Kyle Shanahan at the time broke the bank for and said after watching all of the free agent tape out there last spring was so enamored with that he like pinpointed him and made him a target? Or is it the guy that he drafted, was a draft target for him and an ideal fit again in this zone scheme back when he was in Atlanta? And so I feel like, or is it going to be this Breida guy who like everyone's like, well, he's not as famous, so, or is as assumedly exciting, right? So like that draft capital's not fantastic. So, or doesn't have the same connection to Kyle Shanahan. But I feel like those first two, Coleman and McKinnon, kind of cancel each other out, which means give me the value of Breida, who is definitely the best runner of the three of them.
Can he stay healthy?
Can Tevin Coleman? Can Jerick McKinnon?
Nobody in that backfield can. It's a plague.
No, like it's the same question. I just feel like the skill sets between Coleman and McKinnon overlap so much that one of those guys is going to lose out, right? Like they're not going to. Or I don't know. Like good luck. If you're asking me who I'm drafting today, I will again, not surprisingly, reach for value and say Breida has some interesting appeal that is sneaky and allows him to be rather cheap. Running for 5.3 yards per carry in 2018, ranked fourth, which ranked fourth last year, and was certainly much more efficient and healthy over the past two healthy seasons when you look at the rest of the running backs on this team. So, And
I think you're right on track there. Matt Breida, he's going running back 53. Whether it's redraft, dynasty, you can have him for literally pennies on the dollar. And if he can stay healthy, that's a great value. So one thing I want to pick your brain on. This is something that I've been in discussions with a lot of people, and one take that I've had. So, do you see any possibility of Jerick McKinnon strictly kind of having that passing down role? He had 43 receptions in 2016, 51 in 2017 with Minnesota. So whenever Dalvin Cook went down in 2017, Murray handled the bulk of the work on the ground. McKinnon was involved in the passing game. Do you think we could kind of see, I don't want to say thunder and lightning because I don't know if we're going to call Tevin Coleman thunder, but do you think that we can kind of see that same game plan? Obviously different coaches, different scheme, but see that same game plan with Tevin Coleman getting more of the first and second down work and Jerick McKinnon getting more of the passing down work. Again, assuming they both can stay healthy, which I think it's a big if right now.
That makes sense because Kyle Shanahan is one of the most creative offensive minds, and this franchise obviously values versatility, right? So I will say valuing versatility is kind of what makes Breida less interesting. But I don't even think, like, as I'm saying that, I'm like, I don't even think that's true because I don't think that Coleman and McKinnon, like, they're just different. Yes, it's possible. I don't like it, though. Like, I don't like any of it. If you're asking me who I think of these three is most likely to see the lion's share of the touches, it is Tevin Coleman. That is who I would, like, bet on to carry the bulk of the load, but I don't know what that means. Like, I don't know if that means, 13 touches and then the rest of them are all 7 here and 6 there. Like, I don't know how it's going to shake out. And I certainly won't know yet. And I won't, and also we're not going to know until we know how healthy McKinnon is. He's still working back from the ACL tear. It has been less than a year. There are, as we've seen with Darius Geis, setbacks that can certainly happen, hamstring pulls. Like, I just feel like McKinnon is, of the three of them, I am less confident about him. I am the least confident of him staying healthy.
And it's crazy. So, Superflexology, we do a lot of Superflex leagues, and Dynasty in particular. But last year in Dynasty Superflex leagues, Jerick McKinnon was actually a third-round startup pick. Third round. Again, hindsight's always 20/20, and the injury, and obviously now not the best of situations with a crowded backfield. But it's crazy. That hype was ridiculous.
I mean, in a high-stakes league, I almost blew the bank on him, so maybe I'm just still a little burnt by it.
You're a little bitter. It's okay. We'll forgive you. So, again, looking at the three running backs, Tevin Coleman currently going around running back 30, McKinnon running back 45, and Breida all the way down there at running back 53. And you're okay with taking Breida at that value, but maybe not Coleman.
I mean, I could be, depending on how my draft shakes out, maybe convinced about taking Coleman at some point, but I'm definitely avoiding McKinnon. And if I'm looking for a late round flyer and Breida's available, and depending on the construction of my roster, I would certainly consider him there.
Right. And again, at that price, why not? It's an absolute, it's a flyer, it's a dart throw, but he's somebody that's shown that he can do it. So Tevin Coleman, he's going, like I said, running back 30. Right behind him is Lamar Miller. Would you take
that's
Miller
such a
over
man
Coleman?
pick. It would depend on which running back, what my, like if I went for a higher risk running back, like let's say I went with Dalvin Cook, right, as my RB1, I might feel a little bit better about balancing that with Lamar Miller. But if I went with someone like, I find myself choosing between Nick Chubb and Dalvin Cook quite frequently, as just my drafts have tended to go. But I think like if I went with Nick Chubb and I'm not as worried about the Kareem Hunt return, because I think the team is going to become much more efficient down the stretch anyway, especially if that defense takes the next step that we are anticipating and hoping it will in Cleveland, then I think I would probably feel more comfortable taking Tevin Coleman. So it would depend on, you're always trying to strive for balance. I'm a Libra anyway, so it's something we try to do. But I hope that answers your question.
No, and actually that's a really fantastic take, and I think it's something that a lot of people don't talk about. So if you're making a somewhat riskier pick at the beginning with a Dalvin Cook type, maybe try to find a safer option later in a Lamar Miller, and vice versa. I think that's a really good take, and I don't think it's something that people really talk about too often. So, Liz, again, 4 really crowded backfields, 4 backfields that, like you said, we don't know what's going to happen. You might as well flip a coin some weeks. But one last question about these 4 backfields. So, the last time that there has not been a team in the NFL to produce 2 fantasy, at least running back 2s or better, so 2 top 24 running backs, was 2010. Every other year we've seen at least 1, 2, and at least it was sometimes 3. Out of these 4 backfields, 49ers, Broncos, Seahawks, Chiefs, if you had to throw your money down, who has the best chance of producing 2 running back 2s?
I'm going to say it's between Denver and Seattle for me. And I think because of the relentless run, oh God, but you have to imagine that Denver offense is going to be allowed to be efficient because the defense is so good. But you know what? I'm going to say Seattle. I'm going to do it.
Again, I am feeling really good about myself because that's exactly who I would have picked out of the 4. And again, one of the reasons that I stacked Carson and Penny in the Scott Fishbowl. Liz, I love the insight and the discussion surrounding these backfields, and depending on how it all breaks, you might be able to find tremendous value, especially later in drafts in 2019. And before we sign off here, Liz, what do you have in the works throughout the remainder of the offseason? Some projects that you want to let people know about?
Well, my goodness, everything is starting to ramp up. Matt Harmon and I do a podcast called the Yahoo Fantasy Football Podcast. That's weekly in August. The first week of August, we'll be going back to 2 times a week, so be sure to subscribe to that wherever you consume your audio. We're doing some positional projections. I've got running backs and wide receivers, 10 apiece. They're called Fearless Forecasts. We're going to be doing those for video. And a lot of cool things coming up this season. We've got some cool, individual pieces. I'm doing a piece about tight end strategy that's coming up next week, and the content is just going to start ramping up. Lots more video, lots more audio, and I will say that Yahoo has a lot of really innovative concepts, content and video especially wise, planned for the regular season. So just stay tuned and make sure that your home league is played on Yahoo Fantasy.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about that. I will say that I have my brother-in-law, actually, he runs a league off of ESPN. He also does it standard scoring, so you really can't be too upset with him. He's still
I will say at Yahoo Fantasy, our standard is now half-point PPR, so we are living in the future like progressives.
I was going to say, very progressive of you. So we will be sure to keep an eye out for all of the great content, and I'm sure that everybody already is, but if you're not, and if you've been living under a rock, follow Liz and Follow Liz on Twitter and Instagram. What is it?
At Liz Loza
_FF
on both IG and Twitter.
Perfect. Again, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. But Mitch left me, so it's just me tonight. Extremely appreciative. Everybody, thank you for listening. I'm John Bauer. Find me on Twitter at the Bauer Club. He's here in spirit for Mitch Sorensen at DinoMC, and be sure to follow the podcast on Twitter and Instagram at Superflexology. Have a great night.
Thank you for listening to the Superflexology podcast. If you want the latest news in fantasy football, follow us on Twitter at Superflexology, The Bauer Club, and DinoMC.